Craig, would you be able and willing to jump a little ahead in the order?
I will do that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. You have a very provocative statement to build from tonight, and that is the church need not survive. What do you mean by that?
Maybe I should start out by kind of framing how my discussion proceeds under that title. Something like 35 or 40 years ago, Howard Zinn published a book entitled A People's History of the United States, in which he set out to tell the story of the US, not in terms of the great European powers who colonized the Western Hemisphere, but in terms of the people who were most directly affected and most deeply wounded by that colonial incursion. And I think that we would do well to learn how to read the Bible in a similar way, not in terms of sort of classy Euro-American, sort of middle to upper middle class life, but in terms of very dire circumstances. And although any kind of account of the historical situation of the people of ancient Israel is going to be controversial, there'll be positions on all sides of every issue. It seems fairly clear that for most of the history of ancient Israel, almost everybody lived in little villages far removed from the large cities. They lived subsistence lives on the verge of starvation, death by disease or injury, or death by military incursion. So that it was very difficult to maintain the longevity, not only of the life of each person, but of a village or of a family. And so very high mortality rates, especially during childbirth. Mothers and infants would die during childbirth in enormous numbers. And high mortality rates among children. It seems reasonable to me when I read people with greater expertise than I have saying that not only was the life expectancy low, it was shockingly low. So much so that it was difficult to find anyone older than about 25 years old in one of those little impoverished villages. An elder would be someone 30 or so years old. A child would grow up without ever having known its grandparents because they simply died at the normal age. Now, again, all of this could be disputed, but what I think can't be disputed is how difficult it was to stay alive in ancient Israel. So much so that sexual activity had to be severely disciplined and policed. The story of God's choosing Israel and coming alongside of Israel, of setting up a covenant with Israel, is the story of God's being for Israel, to protect Israel, to preserve Israel, to build a hedge, a protective wall around Israel. And the law was there in order to keep Israel whole and keep it surviving. Now, this is very important. And I think the very strict laws of the Old Testament have various functions, but among them are the functions to keep people alive and relatively well. And so, of course, you would, if I mean, can you imagine a situation where you have a village of 50 people or less, so isolated that you may never have met a stranger your whole life, and everyone around you seems to be dying? And the only way for your village to continue is for childbirth, for children to be born. And it is the most dangerous of all events. You celebrate the birth of a child, you look forward to the birth of a child, but you fear the moment when the child will come. And so sex is regulated in the Hebrew scriptures very severely. And that is true of other such societies around the world. For the history of the world, as far as we can tell, sexual activity was severely policed. Now you have variations. What kind of sexual activities would be allowed under what circumstances and that kind of thing. I mean, the differences of sort of sexual laws in various societies that difference is very pronounced. But in the case of Israel, regulating sexuality was a way of protecting people. And along comes Jesus, okay? And the thing about Jesus is that his proclamation of good news is a proclamation to poor people who are expected to die, who will live short lives, who may not make it to childbearing age. If they give birth to a child who survives, they may be dead before the child can even walk. These are people who are oppressed not only by Rome, but also by the Jerusalem temple officials who taxed them just as Rome did. And Jesus says to these people who have no way out, he says to them, you don't have to survive. God is with you. And no matter how far you are beaten down, no matter how foreclosed your future seems to be, God is with you as I am with you. And he proclaimed that not only with his words, but also with his body, as he touched and was touched by unclean people, as he lived with and ate with the people who would make him unclean, as he touched dead bodies, as he touched hemorrhaging women, perpetually menstruating, the perpetually menstruating woman. And then he demonstrated with absolute clarity this promise that God is with us even when we lose massively. He demonstrated that on Holy Week, when he was taken by the powers of the world, by Rome and the Jerusalem temple, was tortured and destroyed, his body mutilated and thrown into a pit and sealed. And when he came forth on Easter Sunday, bearing all of the wounds that were inflicted upon him, he showed to the world that you need not survive, that there is a kind of peace, a kind of justice, a kind of life that cannot be understood by the standards of survivability. And I'm not sure how much time I'm eating up here, Tom, but let's see if I can make
got another minute or so.
What'd you say?
I got about another minute, and Brian
Right, well,
Postwaite says,
fill out part of that minute and let's see what happens.
okay.
And so when during Holy Week, when Jesus approaches the temple, he declares what is prophesied in Isaiah 56, that the temple is to be a house of prayer for all peoples. And in that passage in Isaiah, it is stated in particular that those who are to be welcomed into the temple are strangers, Gentiles, and eunuchs, the queer of ancient Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that.
Mm-hmm.
Eunuchs, what gender is a eunuch? Were the eunuch's testicles crushed? Was the person emasculated by some sort of act in order so the person could perform a certain role? Eunuchs were not permitted into the temple because they had no ability to improve the survivability of the people of Israel. They were unclean because they were a drain on the life of Israel.
Mm.
And in our current situation, the only question about LGBTQIA people, I mean, the only reason why one would want to exclude them is because they can't have babies.
Hmm.
And in Jesus, the message is declared unambiguously that you don't have to survive. Your family doesn't have to survive. Your village doesn't have to survive. Your tribe, your nation, the world does not have to survive. There is no reason any longer for one to marry.
Mm.
Now you can get married, it's okay. If you get sick, you can be taken care of, you should be. People should be good to one another, but they should be good to one another even if being good to one another drains them and makes it more likely that they won't make it to next year.
I love it.
Sorry
That
for
is
the
so-
lengthy monologue.
No, that's good though. That's so powerful. And the chat box is lighting up with people saying, thanks so much, Craig, and preach it. Let's have an altar call. It's really, really good. I want to take a point of personal privilege though, Craig, and ask you a question
Right.
that's kind of a little off what you're just saying.
Sure.
Which it's kind of weird because what you're saying is so powerful that I should probably follow that up. But I've got you now, so I want to ask this question. When I look at the theologians who contributed to this book and other theologians who might have wanted to contribute to this book but couldn't for fear of losing their job, I think about the arguments we've had with each other over the years at conferences and how
and I would still voice those arguments against you, Tom. I really
yeah, I know it. And I think, Steve McCormick was, he's having a problem, but he would think differently than you and I would. Eric Severson's coming on. We are not monolithic amongst the quote professional theologians and denomination, people who have done this for a living, whatever. We come at it from so many different angles, have disagreements, profound ones, and yet the vast majority are on the same page on the queer issues. So here's my question. Why do you think that is? Why can Craig Keen and Tom Ward have very different metaphysics, methods, Christologies, whatever?
I haven't got a metaphysics at all.
Yeah, that's right. You have no metaphysics. Yeah. What do you account for? How do you account for this? That I'm not saying everybody in the denomination, is affirming who's a theologian, but a vast majority, I think, are, and many who wrote for this book obviously are. What do you think? How do you account for this?
Well, I mean, the simple answer would be for me to talk about love, but that's what everybody's talking about. So let me talk about
good. Yeah.
I mean, it's not that I'm going to leave that aside, but let me focus on something
I know.
else.
Yeah.
The theological tradition of the Church of the Nazarene emerged out of the American holiness movement. And there are two sides to that movement. One is solidarity with outcasts. I mean, standing with women, women's ordination, when that was considered to be a wild-eyed, crazy and insane, like civilization destroying move, you know,
Right.
anti-Bible and all that, standing with abolitionists against slavery. I mean, that kind of thing. The other move, the other emphasis in the American Holiness Movement is the doctrine of entire sanctification, which of course has been articulated in all kinds of horrible, life-destroying ways. I know, I know all about that. But the doctrine of entire sanctification is the call. Well, actually, we've used language about that these last 2 days. I mean, releasing to God the unknown bundle, making sure there are no rooms in your heart that have not been opened to Christ. I mean, putting it all on the altar, dying to self. All of this kind of language is a call to absolute devotion to the gospel, absolute devotion to this call of Christ to move out into solidarity with others, even if it kills you, even if solidarity with these others means that you will be drained of life and you won't make it another year.
Yeah.
Now, that's what we're calling LGBTQIA plus and straight people too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we're saying, let's let them in. You know, we're a big tent. I so hate that metaphor. I want to burn down all the tents. The call is not to let folks squeak in so they can hang out and be loved. The point is to call people to give their lives away. And if they give their lives away in a same-sex relationship, we should rejoice. We should sing hymns. We should send hallelujahs to heaven. Because these people are doing something that, frankly, I don't see any evangelicals doing, namely, abandoning themselves to the coming of the mutilated, glorified body of Christ. So we have heard this story. You have heard that story. I've heard this story. We may disagree about the language, but at the heart of where we are, we believe that even if it kills me, I will move into solidarity with the people Jesus has moved into solidarity with. And I want to tell you, I'm 73 years old, have spent all of my adult life in the Church of the Nazarene, and there have been moments when I thought it would kill me, that I couldn't get around another year.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, you know, as Bonhoeffer famously said, when Christ calls you, he bids you come and die. And I want to tell you, that means dying with the marginalized. And if you want to find somebody who's marginalized, look at where self-assured, holier than thou, self-righteous people send their vitriol and bile. Look there. Those are the people that you are to stand and live and fall and die with. Yeah.
That's excellent. Perfect. Thank you. I could listen to you all day, Craig. That's
no, you
great.
couldn't. I'd make you mad eventually.
Well, I'm not saying that, but that's true. but those are such powerful words. Thank you so much. And thank you for contributing your essay to the book. Really powerful. And we better move to our next person. Thanks, Craig.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom.